And so we launch out the front end, and I think it was a left turn, and away we go in zone 5, afterburner, scorching out to make the intercept. We get radar contact fairly quickly. We end up converting on an SU-15 Flagon at the time. Go out there and pull up behind an SU-15, which was just amazing at the time.
Did he have any awareness, or did their C2 have any awareness of you guys, or did he show any awareness?
That we don't know. I'm pretty sure, they were close, and at the time running the intercept, I think he starts turning back to the west. And so now the biggest thing is creating an international incident where you get so focused on running this intercept, you end up going through a buffer, Soviet airspace, and you end up getting shot at or whatever. So that's kind of, if you listen to the comms on it, that's my biggest concern, is not to become that guy, right? So anyway, we make the intercept. There's no aggressive maneuvering. It was cool to see this airplane with the silver and a green nose, drab green. And then there's also MiG-23s up. Guys are running intercepts on those guys. And the MiG-23, they came out with their wings out. They never put them back. They were loaded probably with Apex missiles, AA-7s at the time. But again, not really aggressive maneuvering. As this thing occurred, we go back to the ship, we start talking about it. Rumor has it that these were senior level pilots flying out to try to get a chance to take a look at an F-14, to see what the reactions would be. It was more of a look-see, possibly from those guys, than some sort of preconceived tactic that they were trying to develop and see whether or not the carrier group would react accordingly.
Tower, release you, runway 4 left, wind 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seats high, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2. My burn ramp curve was at 354. That's on. Next picture 16, 15,000, Viper 1 target.
So, Greg, thanks for joining me on the podcast, man. It's good to have you on here finally.
Yeah, John, thanks so much. It's been a little bit trying to get this thing together, but I'm glad we were able to sit down and have a chat.
We did, yeah. We've been coordinating back and forth. But honestly, I think jumping back, because we first met in the fall on a flight crossing the mighty Atlantic Ocean, I think. Which was that your last FedEx?
Yeah, and I think we came out of Shanghai.
Yeah,
and we came across, and I didn't know at the time whether that was going to be the last one. I had been suffering a little bit with proverbial neck problems from flying the F-16, which for some reason started to flare up, and it was kind of a lousy trip in terms of sleeping. I thought maybe that was going to be the last one, and then of course I got involved a little bit with the Airline Pilots Association. But yeah, as it was, you were on my last flight, and I don't know if it was you, but somebody took some pictures, so at least I have that in my photo file of what it was like for that last trip landing back in Memphis.
That really, there's a thread we can pull on there, which I guess sometimes maybe you had an inkling, hey, that was going to be the end, but obviously you still had a little bit of runway left where you could have done a little bit more flying before hitting the age.
Right.
But that's an interesting thing too, which I take away is sometimes you just never know when the last time might be. Yeah.
What was my whole thing at about, 365 days to go, and that you're going to retirement is a year away, is that you always, it's your hope that that you're going to know when it's your last flight, if that makes sense. Because you got a medical, probably, getting your first class medical. Who knows what could happen every 6 months. So that was always one of my hopes that, I kind of would know when my last flight was. So, trying to remember everything that occurred and trying to close out a 35-year career as I did.
Yeah, that's piece I took away, honestly, from like Jerry Seinfeld, I think. I watched Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And that show was on the rocket ship, right? And he just said, hey, it's done. Like he went out on top.
Right.
Being able to choose, I think, is like the ultimate blessing. Like if you actually get to choose when it's time versus being told when it's time.
And that was a great flight. Yourself and the other guys made it outstanding. So I was glad to end on that note as we pulled in and blocked in for the final time, at least for me. So thank you.
Yeah. And as you said, that wrapped up a 35-year career there, but that really wasn't the end. Really, it's a much longer career. And I want to jump back. Where did it begin? Where did that spark for aviation start for you?
Yeah, I was the kid that always wanted to fly. I remember we lived in a house in the approach end of the Minneapolis airport. I'm from Minneapolis originally, and we were on the approach corridor. So for a Christmas, I got a Radio Shack VHF radio that you put together, and you could listen to the airliners. And so that was me. My uncle was an air traffic controller, so he gave me an old low and high altitude charts of the area. And I would listen as these guys would come in on approach, and then I could also tune up tower. And so that was always what I, always as a passion, always wanted to do. I remember the first 747 I ever saw, Northwest Orient Airlines at the time. It was a 100 series, or maybe it was a 200. Anyway, it just how that thing could hang in the air was just beyond me as a 13 or 12-year-old, whatever the time frame was. But yeah, it was amazing. It was always in my blood. High school, I worked odd jobs to pay for flight lessons, and I joined the Civil Air Patrol. And for anybody out there watching who's paying for a general aviation or renting an airplane, back then I paid $10 an hour wet on tack time for a 150, and if I felt really spendy, I could pump out $14 an hour for a 172. And like I said, that was gas, and that was tack time. So if you went around the pattern, you could log a 1.0 and pay for a 0.8. And so I was really fortunate in that respect. And so I even had a flight instructor who for every 3 hours, he'd charge me 2. And I'm not sure what I paid back in the day, whether it was $15 an hour or $10 an hour for his time, but it was really reasonable. But I pumped gas when that was a thing, and it wasn't self-service. I mowed lawns, I caddied, and all that money that I ever earned went into flight lessons. So I did get my private pilot license as a high schooler. And and I used to fly anything I could after I got my license, Citabras, decathlons, sundowners. That was kind of my thing. So until I ended up going to college.
And that was before color TV, I imagine. Yeah.
No, not quite. But there was no remote.
Could you imagine?
I was my father's remote. I remember that. So,
but could you imagine? I mean, today, like if you could get a plane for that price, it's amazing how much it's changed. But it's very cool. The fact that obviously you had a goal,
yep,
and you did everything you could to pursue that path, which
yes,
is an underlying theme with going after a profession like this.
Yeah, and Gladwell, the author, right, talks about 10,000 hours or whatever, and I think that I'm gonna put that part of my 10,000 hours, whether it was sitting and listening to airplanes or whatever. Fake it till you could make it. Yeah, that was pretty much my high school life.
Well, how did you end up in the military path then? Why not, kind of pursuing a civilian route to go fly a 747 or whatever it might be? Right.
So as a kid, I remember we drove up on a family trip from Minneapolis up to Duluth, and there was an Air National Guard squadron up there flying F-101 Voodoos at the time. And I'm the kid on the chain link fence, just watching as it happened to be drill weekend, and a flight of 2 go taxiing by. And of course, I got the salute from the guy in the lead, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever. And of course, where we parked, they turned to hit the active. And I think they're J57s in that thing. And it was a hard burner light, bam, bam type of thing as they rolled down the runway, and the heat waves and all that. And of course, then the climb out, and it's like, all right, that's it, man, right there. And I was probably 8 years old. This is probably 68, not to date myself, but, a long time. Anyone's looking at a F-101, like, yeah, man, that's Century Series. What the heck is, that's right after Orville. Right. So anyway, that kind of got me going down the road. And then I used to write to fighter squadrons. I've got a triple nickel, the 555th. They were at Luke. I said, I want to fly, whatever. They sent me a squadron scarf, patches, an Eagle driver patch. I mean, because Steve Ritchie at the time, I think, was the squadron CO, if I'm not mistaken. And as a kid, I used to get this stuff. I had BFM. Someone sent me, a mimeograph BFM, how to do this. So in my 150 in Civil Air Patrol, I was deadly all over western Minnesota. But anyway, so that was me. I mean, I just would do that thing. And whoever these guys were, the PAO, the public affairs officer, God bless them, giving a 12-year-old the time of day and sending stuff. Yeah. And talk about a small world. My daughter, who, who's an Air Force Academy grad, she went to Terre Haute on an ops summer, and she flew with the triple nickel. So how this comes full circle is amazing. And of course, she got a current patch, and I've got that upstairs. But yeah, it's kind of weird how that all works out.
Yeah, it's a super small world. What is really impressive to me hearing those stories is in the day without internet, being able to find units, find addresses to like mail and send stuff. I had Raisin Cane on here, a rush bunch of guard units in the 90s. How do you even find those places? So now with like the connectivity of, not every, but most units have their own social media where you can immediately reach out and connect to people, but obviously not the case. So I appreciate that level of like determination trying to go figure out actually making it happen. Which is cool.
No, it was pretty cool to get that. I'll always remember getting that big package and what it meant, and again, it gets you going down the road and keeps you focused and makes you enthused and determined to kind of play this thing out. So
yeah, and I will say, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but public service announcement. Obviously, the guy or gal who read your letter, that was extra work for them to have to go put all this stuff together and mail it. But the impact it had, and so that's what I think too is, I was fortunate doing air shows. You can never have a bad day. You always need to interact because you never know that one interaction you're going to have with someone that might put them on a completely different path. Might turn them on to aviation, might turn them off because you had a bad attitude, or maybe it's the thing that is the catalyst that drives them pushing a little bit further. So you just never know, and I think every one of us in this world can have those little interactions for sure.
Yeah, I did do a couple static displays in my military career, and you try to remember that, or taxiing out, whether it was in the previous Navy life, the kid on the fence line, or even with our current job, I'll remember always going in Hawaii as you taxi out. There's that one spot where everybody watches. You want to wave and you want to make sure that you acknowledge their presence out there, because you just don't know what the impact is going on down the line.
100%. So I think that's really important to remember. And obviously a testament for, probably you sitting here, maybe you pursued it, maybe you wouldn't, but I'm sure that was definitely some motivation to keep pressing forward.
Yeah. So all that, I ended up applying to the service academies, specifically all three, and, was accepted by Navy. And I wasn't quite sure about Naval Aviation and Air Force, and then kind of looked into the carrier aspect of it and flying off a carrier, and so that kind of became my first choice, and that was the road I chose to go down. So went to Annapolis 78 to 82 and graduated in, as I said, in 1982.
I'm always curious too, that kind of time period winding down off Vietnam. I imagine there was still some sentiment that wasn't so positive. Obviously, it didn't stop you from what you do. But
thank goodness, because your competitive pool probably is a little. When I look at what my daughters went through, I'm like, right place, right time could have played out in this very heavily, whatever. But yes, it was that, and I remember talking to my friends and their parents, and I'm like, how could you not want to go here? And I had collected, and again, the internet wasn't a thing. I wrote away and they used to produce these thick books, right, for prospective candidates or whatever. I don't know what they spent, but they were beautiful, glossy, so I'd get Annapolises and I'd get Air Forces and, just page through them and look at the different courses and all that other stuff. And again, kind of kept you enthused and focused on what the future could possibly hold. But that was it was quite a process, going through it. Everybody knows what usually it's an appointment and the application and all that. And luckily things fell together and I was able to get accepted in the class of '82 for Navy.
And how was your experience in Annapolis?
It was good. I was a mechanical engineering major. I wasn't, I did okay. I met some brilliant people, some guys that you go like, holy crap, how, and to me, the most impressive individuals that go to that school are the D1 athletes. And I'm just going to call out, maybe football, how they do what they do and then major in engineering, is pretty amazing. It really opened up a whole new world to me on individuals and this whole cross section of 18-year-olds at that time. And man, there's some people here that are pretty sharp. So it kind of makes you up your game. And again, to me, school it was a means to an end. I was focused on what's this outcome going to be, and you hope your eyes. I remember getting a pair of cheaters. I always had great lighting on my desk because, I'm not sure what your experience was, but that whole screening that's going to occur, there was no radio keratotomy. LASIK wasn't a thing. Yeah. What you brought to the table is what you're going to have. So I remember being really careful about that. And that was my excuse, honestly, Rain, not to study, because I wanted to save my eyes for the future. And so anyway, it all kind of worked out.
No, it's all about priority. And I don't know if I'm sure it's more or less the same, but the timeline when people get checked out, for me, it was my third year when you got a pre-screening, hey, potentially pilot qualified.
Yes.
Maybe good, but the real one happened after you got your pilot slot, where we had to go out to Brooks. I think now it's in a Wright Pat, but it was multi-day event.
Yeah.
To this day, the depth perception test, I think that thing is bogus. The little circles, I'm
yes.
I know it's not the last one. I know it's not the first one. I'm going to guess in between somewhere.
Yeah.
But you just don't know. Your left eye has a little bit of pressure. The group
right.
I was in, there were guys who had just minor things that they were unaware of that were disqualifying, and that would really, for lack of a better phrase, suck to go through all of that, and then, oh, by the way, the pressure in your eyes is a little too much, and you're out.
Right. Yeah. For us, it was down at NAMI in Pensacola, very early on in the screening process, and it was I still remember kind of sitting in that seat in that stupid depth perception. Now that you've provided me with that flashback. So whatever, but it all seemed to have worked out, and it worked out great. And just to backtrack a little bit about the academy experience, I think one of the highlights in terms of aviation was in the summer you could go on these cruises or whatever, and between my junior and senior year I opted for the Marine Corps option cruise. And the way they worked that was we had to get the Navy part done. So we would go to San Diego, jump on a ship, sail over to Pearl Harbor, and then we went up to K-Bay, Kaneohe, and spent time with the Marines, both the air and the land side, including the recon guys who took us out and beat the crap out of us, thought we were in good shape until you end up with these guys. But part of that was a backseat ride in an F-4. So I got to fly with VMFA 232, the Red Devils, in the back seat. And, and any new thing, as you know, in aviation, first time putting a mask on, a G suit, sitting in the back in the Rio seat of that F4, you're looking through a straw in terms of your total awareness. And I remember I think we did a 1v1 thing, demo. And I just remember getting crushed in that back seat, at probably 6.5 Gs.
Yeah, right.
That was a huge highlight of that Naval Academy experience. What I remember the most.
Did you want track Marine aviation or naval aviation? Did you get a choice, or was that just, hey, I know I can go out to Hawaii?
One thing about the Naval Academy, you're always marching and you're always wearing a dress uniform more than not, or on occasion, I should say. And I tell you what, the Marine Corps always had the greatest uniforms, in my opinion. So, I wanted to see what this was, and I didn't mind tromping around out in the weeds and whatever. But what changed my mind is one of these nights we went to an island called Koalave, which no longer is used for live fire. but we actually go off the ship in one of those amphibious assault vehicles, where they drive off and you go underwater and hope the heck you come back up, and then drive off. So we're all sitting in the back, and we get there, we offload, and then they take us up the island to the live firing range. We spend the night, sleeping bag, and I learned a quick lesson about topography, and I thought this low point would be great for my back and sleeping, and of course it rained, and that just became a river, and so that was one part of the Marine life. I was like, yeah, this is okay, but the real kicker was they did a live fire exercise at night, and they did, I think it's called final effective fire. It's basically where you think your position's going to get overrun, and you let everything you got go in one big massive fire exchange, and everything's tracers, that kind of thing. And I thought, okay, it's kind of cool being up range on this, but if you're fighting going the other way, I'm not so sure this is the life for me. So anyway, the guys that do that, it's amazing. And but I thought, well, if my eyes go bad, because I hadn't gone through NAMI yet, the options in the Navy are probably a little bit better than what the Marines had for me, at least in what I thought. And so that kind of said, yeah, I think I'm going to just stick with the Navy if I can. But it was a great experience, and hats off to those guys. They shave. This is the other thing too. I learned a couple of things about the Marines in my academy experience. Officers always eat last. And, in the corporate world, it's interesting talking to people when they'll have a function. Who's behind serving food? Is it the management guys or whatever? Or are they the first in line to get the food, right? That can tell you a lot about in a company. And then the guys shaved every day, if they dry shaved or whatever. And I thought, okay, so there's that discipline thing that probably is, it shows, exactly why they've been effective fighting force since their, very, very beginnings. So, anyway.
Yeah. Always impressed by the Marines. I think I've told the podcast a couple times, and actually Puffy, he's there at FedEx. When I was in Afghanistan, worked with him as a liaison for the Marine unit he was with, and I went out to Camp Leatherneck with him, and the joke for me, at least, I tell people is like, he's like, I'm gonna work out. And I think I walked out of like the room at like 7:30 in the morning. Like everyone is out there running and doing pull-ups, and there's like the one Air Force guy with a cup of coffee. The other aspect was, for Marine aviators, I assume they still do this. Most of them do like a JTAC tour, an embedded ground tour somewhere in there. And so in that time period in Afghanistan where I was working with these guys, I was watching several documentaries too on Afghanistan. And then sure enough, I'm like, oh, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. And they're embedded in it, it was 3 years prior, and they're in this intense firefight in Helmand Valley, and they're the JTAC for this unit. Now, now they're doing a flying tour. Like it's different. Now the Air Force has a couple of those things, but for the most part, if you're gonna be a pilot, you're gonna stay a pilot.
Yeah. So so that was kind of the academy thing, and what I remember in terms of fighter aviation at that time. But okay, so you end up graduating, but prior to that is service selection night, and that's always kind of a big deal because class rank was everything. Sure, you did your pre-screening for aviation. So, if you had the pilot qual, that's great. If you could be a Rio or a Wizzo, you knew that was also an option just based on your eyes or whatever. But it was by class rank, and they used to have and they may still have an FM radio station, and there would be a broadcast. And let's say there's 300 pilot slots available for a class of 1,000. Right. And so, you would be wherever you were in the class rank. And if you're down on a lower end, you're listening to, they've just 250 selected it. I got 50 left. And so that was always a big night. And but things the way they were, that happened. I was able to get a pilot slot. So that was fantastic. But then the other thing that was even to me kind of as important was you could select what the Navy called TAD or Air Force TDY is, or casual now, I guess is the right word. So you're a little jammed up in the flight training pipeline. So what do you do with these O1s, right? These ensigns that are just going to be, treading water for a while until Pensacola can accept them. So one of the things I had come across in Air Power magazine way back when was this thing called Topgun. And it talked about the Navy Fighter Weapons School, what they did and what they were all about. And I found out that they were going to provide 2 slots for 2 academy grads to come out and go TAD there, non-cost orders, but basically be stashed at the squadron, for a period of time until your Pensacola slot opened. And to me, that was kind of as important or whatever that as far as getting a pilot slot. But the ability to then to go to Top Gun as a stash ensign was probably one of the best things that ever happened in my naval flying career. And so myself and another guy named Pager, Tom Page, which if you go on YouTube and look for an F-14 barricade at night, he's been on a couple podcasts. It's a heck of a story. But Pager and myself were the 2 stash ensigns at Top Gun during the summer of '82. And I got to tell you, Rain, it's again that Gladwell thing, 10,000 hours or whatever, fake it till you make it. Here you had a chance to kind of see the guys that, are at the top of the game in terms of ACM and fighter weapons school and everything that comes with being on a staff member. But you see how they do business. And, you got a chance. They were gracious enough to get us all the quals that we needed to get a backseat qual for them. And they had a couple F5Fs, so 2-seaters back at the time. They flew F5s and A4s. And so we were able to get some hops as seats would open up and get to do ACM and watch them, the briefing, the flight, the debriefing, which anybody will tell you is probably more important, or the most important part of any sort of mission is a debrief and learning things from mistakes made or whatever. We had a chance to in fact do that. So that set me up. You've worn a mask, you've done all that stuff. So when you go to flight training, all of a sudden you put a helmet on. All the superfluous things have been taken care of. You know what it smells like, feels like, puts a helmet. Yeah. That stuff's all done. And so you're trying to make that little straw get a little bit bigger in terms of your first couple flights, and the admin portion at least is something you're comfortable with, or relatively, and you can just concentrate on the flying aspects of it. So and as you can imagine, great individuals there, and I ended up actually working for some of them in my first squadron. They were on the staff there and went to a VF2. And I ended up coming back to them after, flight training and going through the F-14 RAG, as we called it, and going out to the fleet. So that was a great experience.
That's huge. It had that kind of see the tempo, the temperament, the flow, and again, right. I always say giving backseat rides, kind of the same deal. It's sensory overload. Anytime you go to a new environment and just until you get a couple reps under you, all your brain bites are spent just trying to figure out what the heck is going on, whether it be the backseat or walking into a new squadron and having that kind of insight is huge.
I mean, those guys were good enough. Hey, formation. Hey, Hoser, you got it. Just don't hit the guy or whatever. And so, you kind of got used to that type of thing, and just seeing planes up close. It was great. And I will say this, another memorable part. I was only there to September. I think I got there basically in June, and or maybe right after the 4th, somewhere in there. Maybe I was out there for the 4th. But anyway, I had to go back in September and start my flight training. But so one of the classes is going through, and I had a chance to very hush-hush about this at the time, but there's a special speaker coming to speak to the class, and it ends up being Victor Belenko, the guy who flew the MiG-25 to Hokkaido. And at the time, he's still kind of iffy, his security was a thing. And so it wasn't well known what he looked like, rather. And I think he had an assumed name at the time, and probably the CIA was taking care of him. But I did get a chance to hear his story, which was kind of cool about what
he did. You share a little bit about that and his background, because I only saw. Why did Oshkosh AC/DC bar. You know, like I think he made an appearance there.
Okay.
Many years later, and there's a picture of him there. And so people who aren't familiar with his story, it'd be interesting just to shed some light on it.
You know what? I'm going to defer to the internet for the most part, but if you look it up, and I want to say it was in '76, but he basically took a MiG-25 Foxbat, which we were very concerned about at the time. I think they touted it as a Mach 3 fighter, you know, and it was kind of something that got everybody's attention. He flew it into Hokkaido. And then, of course, it was, they took it apart and exploited it and got the real story on what it was like and how it was built and some of its limitations or, some of the positive things it could do. And, of course, his debrief was probably most important. I honestly don't remember much about his presentation. I did know that he had learned a lot of American swear words and thought that was pretty fun during his talk. So there was a lot of swearing with a heavy Russian accent, but it was still a unique opportunity to hear him talk and to actually, to meet him. So
September 6, 1976. I did look.
Okay, all right.
And then he passed away in 2023.
It was relatively recent, and so that was the one thing I do remember is. Being a stash ensign, that was also kind of a cool thing that, most people probably didn't get a chance to experience back in '82. So,
yeah, and obviously he kept, it was under wraps for. I mean, I don't know. He was probably under threat all the way to the end of his days. I think he kind of kept a low profile. Imagine.
Right.
Russians,
right. I think he did come out more and more of it, whether it was in Oshkosh, like you said, or, I did look him up the other day in his assumed name. I saw that. I'm sure he was looking over his shoulder, at least in the very beginning, quite a bit. Yeah. And they kept his identity pretty quiet. I didn't know this was going to be a thing until he walked in the room. And I think he had a handler with him as well. So.
Yeah,
anyway.
That's cool. I'll let you sit in on that for sure. So off to pilot training. Mm-hmm. I know there's probably a couple significant emotional events going through pilot training, but it obviously goes well because you go to the F-14. But how was pilot training? How was F-14 RAG for you? I assume that's the one you wanted. It'd be a pretty hot plane at the time.
Right. So you go down to Pensacola for BI, I think it was, basic indoc. You do a physical fitness test. They had an obstacle course. You take that all-important flight physical, like I mentioned at NAMI. You get that done. Then you kind of go through a ground school, and you're graded since on day one, and you're trying to do the academics. And it really wasn't a hard subject matter, but of course the questions are written in a certain way, and so you just tried to find your way through that minefield without really blowing up and being, come out of it whole on the back end. And then I ended up going up to Whiting to VT2 for the T-34C. And I remember at the time the T-28 was still in existence and being used for flight training. I thought, okay, that would be great with a big radial engine and all that stuff, but it didn't. They were closing it. The pipeline was being closed off, so it was going to be the T-34C. Go through that. Basically, you start VFR, VMC type stuff. It goes into BI, basic instruments, and I think we wrapped up with formation flying. And again, I had a pilot's license, and one of the great, what words of wisdom guys tell you, one of the best ones is, you can, guys show up probably with commercial instrument type stuff, right? And they'll talk about it prior to flying. I was, someone just said, hey, just, if they ask you about it, it's kind of a good sign. Hey, do you have any flight experience before? But you don't wear any of that on your sleeve. Just join up and shut up, as they used to say. And let's see where the chips, fall where they may. So I think just with the background, it worked out okay, and was able to make the cut. So you end up going through VT2, or your primary squadron with the T-34C, and then from that, those grades are compiled, and you can go to the jet pipeline. You can do prop, which in the case was P3s, C-130s, or the helo side of the house. And that's after that whole process is done. That's where they decided back then where you would end up going. It ended up going okay, and so was accepted in the jet pipeline and went to Kingsville, Texas. So, which is they're on the coast. Not a lot out there except King Ranch. So if you end up losing an airplane, you're not going to have to pay off too much, to the American taxpayer in terms of damage from hitting something. So I think that's why they put Beeville and Kingsville where they are. And that was a great experience, flying the T2 Buckeye, and then the advanced trader was the TA-4J at the time. So again, kind of the good thing about that place was there wasn't anything else to do. So your friends and other student pilots, Friday night was Blender Wars, and try to go through daiquiris. I think that was the thing of choice. Used to buy the frozen Minute Maid limeade or pink lemonade, throw that in there with rum or vodka and try to burn your motor out on your blender. Friday nights were usually pretty epic, but at somebody's place. The whole club wasn't a big deal or whatever, but it allowed you to remain focused. There wasn't a lot of distractions to be running around at some big town and get lost and lose what your life's all about at the time. So it was great flying, great friends, type of thing, friendships that were made and continued on afterwards. So the thing that was a little unusual for me was, ending up in T2s. So one of the final portions of that flight training was carrier quals. And I think in the T2, they needed 4 landings to call you a qual and within standards, right? So part of the whole process was FCLPs, which basically we had an outlying field with a carrier box in it with the lens, the Fresnel lens, which I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with, that's used for glide slope information during carrier landings. And you would just go out there and bounce and, get graded and make sure you're ready to go to the boat. So at the time, the Lexington was the training carrier, and it was in the yard. So there was no real carriers to go, to land at and get your initial qual. So what they did was we had qual day, in which they kind of tightened the standards a little bit. We pretended that we were at the boat, came in, with the lead safe. So he's in the flight, he's the first guy leading the flight out. He's an instructor. And then you got the -2 and 3, or if it was a 4-plane, they're all students, come in for a carrier break, he peel off, and we start this thing. And, they looked at it and they said, okay, I think you're good enough to send you the TA4s without being carrier qualified in the T2. Now, when you go to the TA4, you're going to have to get 10. So, you still were going to come up with 10. And in the normal flow of events, it was 4 in the T2, if memory serves, and 6 in the A4. So they just put everything together in the advanced squadron, the A4 squadron, just said, hey, you guys are going to get 10 arrested landings at the boat when your time comes.
I was thinking, Columbus Air Force Base, Oxfield is close to Meridian's Oxfield. They're fairly close to one another, and I know the Meridian guys have the similar setup for the painting of the boat on there. But there's no cable, right? So you're not catching a cable there, you're just seeing where you're hitting the deck.
No, and you've got a instructor out there who was an LSO in the fleet. He came back for his short tour. And so, I was fortunate enough to have, in the advanced squadron, it was an F4 guy who was one of the main LSOs. But, so those guys, they would take these young nuggets to the fleet, with Our Lady flight time to the boat, which I don't think you could pay me enough to do that, to wave to be the LSO, taking a new kid across. So we end up, getting through T2s, going to A4s. There were 2 squadrons, VT-21 and VT-22 in Kingsville at the time. I ended up going to VT-22. Everything's a little bit more. There's, you're dropping bombs. Part of the deal is some air-to-ground stuff. You do some ACM, and of course the boat is the big focus for that. There's night flying in there as well, breakup and rendezvous at night, which was always exciting to do it for the first time. But a couple things about the A4 that I remember was carrier quals. And what their idea was, okay, so you guys haven't been here in the T2, we're going to put you in the back in the A4 with an instructor. And you're going to see what it's like from that perspective, from the overhead into the break, into the pattern, and then a landing followed by a cat shot. And that probably did more harm than good. I'm trying to remember. I've never been something through so violent of a time, and just totally scared the crap out of me after it occurred, because A4s, high wing loading, it was kind of a fast airplane, very stable, but it's not like a straight wing T2, which was basically a Cessna with 2 jet engines on it. So you had kind of a decent approach path in terms of speed. So everything kind of happened a lot quicker than it did before. But so anyway, that was day one. We get shot off the front end, and then you got to do it the next day, yourself. And there's never an instructor in the back seat when they CQ'd, students. You're always solo, except for the lead safe, the guy who's going to lead you out to the boat and check you in with the different controlling units and make sure you can get there, to the overhead. At least start you off on a standard level for everybody, and then it's all up to you. So again, it was that, the little straw in terms of what your vision was and your focus and all that other stuff. And so I go out the first day, and it's okay, not in the terms of an okay 3. It's more like I did okay. It wasn't. It didn't set the world on fire, that kind of thing, and nothing really clicked. But I didn't do anything too dangerous, so I got to come back day 2. They didn't all do it in one day. So on day 2, I actually take the COD, the carrier onboard delivery, whatever, I forget the airplane it was, but they flew a bunch of those out there. We trapped, and so we're going to hot switch on the deck with the other students as they are coming in and finish up. So that gave me a chance to, of course, meet the LSO, who's got the grades from the day prior. And, so he kind of gives me his input. He's a great guy. Like I said, he was an F4 guy. And he, just relax and everything will go okay. And to be honest truth, it's like the clouds parted. I had to get into the airplane and take the cat shot and turn right away, left turn, downwind, and fly the pattern. And that day, it just clicked. I mean, it was just like I could see the ball, I could do everything, and it was a totally different experience than the previous day. And what was great about that airplane, the seat pan that you sat in, the ejection seat, had a pretty big rail, so your thighs, in case of an ejection, your thighs wouldn't flail all over. So you could use your left thumb and put it on the side of the seat as a datum point for what you thought the power setting should be. So as you're coming in on final, you go, okay, that's my 0 point. And now it's a little underpowered, so you'd add a little bit with your thumb as a reference, and then move your thumb up. And instead of kind of your hand being free, like we know in our throttle quadrants or thrust levers in a bigger airplane, it's just kind of hanging out there, and there's no real place to put your hand and feel exactly where you want to have it for fine tuning your power. Yeah. And coming aboard the boat, I mean, that's basically it. Everything, if you can make the corrections early, they're going to be more minor than they would be if it gets away from you. And so that's kind of the whole secret. And that A4 was so solid behind the boat, like I said, with the high wing loading, gust factor really didn't affect it too much. It had speed brakes, of course, that were out during the landing to keep the thrust up. And it was just a turbojet engine that if you didn't get behind on the power and you're up where you should be, it was extremely responsive and it took inputs great. But, I wish I could remember the approach speed range. was it 135? Was it 140? Of course, the boat's moving a little bit with you, so you're going to knock 20 knots off for the closing speed or whatever it is. But the good news is if it's a little quicker, there's not a lot of time to screw it up. So as long as you get it set up when you turn the final and everything's kind of there, and you make fine adjustments on the approach, everything usually turns out okay.
Jumping forward just on this thread, landing, can you compare and contrast that to the F-14? I mean, by that point, obviously you got more reps under your belt, but is it a different beast? Is it easier?
No, it's a lot harder. In fact, one of the lead safes was an F-14 guy, and so we came back, and he brought us back, and that was great. And you celebrated at the club that night. And he said, "Okay, so if you end up F-14s, you got to remember never get behind on that thing because it was a turbofan TF30 engine, which was kind of new. And this is the A model. I only flew the A model, and so if you ever let them spool back, you're gonna have a hard time getting them back powered up. And that was always the greatest concern behind the boat with one of the F-14s. If guys got high or if they got fast, they make a huge correction by bringing the throttles back to idle, and they don't catch it, And I was an LSO in my fighter squadron, and so you would watch the black smoke coming out the back as the guy is making the corrections. And man, if that smoke disappeared, you knew, and of course you're hearing them also that it's back on the power. As you want to make a call to get that power back on. And the other thing too about the F-14, it had that huge swing wing, big wingspan. It had a tendency to glide a little bit. It could have used a little more drag. The speed brake was between the two vertical tails. It could be a little bit more draggy in that. And there was also one down below, I think, on the underside. But in that airplane, again, it had a slower approach speed. The wing loading, I think, was a little bit less, so it got bounced around a little bit more. It could be, if you got behind it a little bit, it could be a handful and not as stable as like an F4 or an A4 behind the boat. So those were kind of things to watch for flying it. So and during our training, that was always brought out and something to look at. And you end up going to the F-14 training squadron. You're doing the same thing. I mean, we did a ton of FCLPs. Now, training command, it's daylight only, right? You don't go out there at night. They wait until you end up going to the fleet squadron, a fleet training squadron, before they take you to the boat at night. And that's a whole different experience, as you can imagine, compared to what daylight will look like.
Yeah, no NVGs. I mean, night is tough even with NVGs, but you obviously can't land with NVGs. So even still, it's interesting that you don't do that in a training squadron. I mean, I know the fleet, I guess the FTR, the fleet training placement squadron, a little bit different than the Air Force, but
right.
That's where you're getting your follow-on top-off training.
Right. So you ended up a couple other things, so it's kind of unusual for my TA4 training, wrap that up. So the boat, you were kind of always, if the boat was available, that took priority. So no matter where you were in your syllabus, except for, of course, the very beginning portion, but I'm sure there was, I forget exactly how many hours or whatever you would have needed, but hey, if the boat's available, we're discontinuing all the other training. We're going to take you, warm you up, and then take you out to the boat because, it's just going to be out there in the Gulf. And for me, that kind of occurred before the ACM finished up. And so I'm supposed to get my wings on this one specific day, but I still got a hop to do. I still got to do an ACM ride in order to get my wings. And the weather's not too good. So what they did was they put a surgrad, which is like a FAPE in the Air Force. So these are the guys that get their wings, but they retain them in terms of staying on and being instructors. So, one of the great guys, one of the great surgrads, in the squadron gets in the back, and we go out and fly the hop, which basically was, I think we could have taken off. And if I did one hard turn, they probably would have completed it. Called it good, and then come back and do a GCA, which was a thing. We don't, the Navy doesn't have ILS. In their trainers is all ground controlling guy, and so that's kind of a different way to come, to land through the goo. So ended up checking the block, come back in, get the GCA, pull back into the chocks, and I think it took an hour to go change, take a shower, put on my dress uniform, and I'm in my winging ceremony within an hour and a half after landing, that kind of thing. So I remember that was kind of a big day and a big blur, to say the least. So off to VF-124 I go. The F-14 RAG or FRS, as we however you want to call it. And so there it was like learning to fly the F-14. Now, again, in the F-14, you got a RIO with a radar in the back. So there's no pilot to bail you out if you goon something up in the front seat. And so I want to say the first couple flights, they do put a pilot in the back and, kind of to walk you through whatever the syllabus is and getting used to the airplane. But then after that, it's a RIO who's one of the instructors sitting in the back. And, those guys are wealth of knowledge. They've been to the fleet. They've been out there on a cruise or two. And they certainly earn their pay dealing with what they had to sit through sometimes, with a new pilot up front. And those stick to really bail them out. You can only talk to them. And, even as a RIO, there's some things you just don't know about up front, flying an airplane or whatever. So, a typical two-ship flight, you've got in the lead, it's the instructor pilot with a student RIO. And then -2, it's a student pilot with an instructor RIO in the back. And that's usually the way, everything was played out when you had a two-plane formation. So
it's interesting. Our F-15 schoolhouse, I think right now, is in the process of merging, where you're having, I don't know the official term, right? But you used to have an F-15C schoolhouse, all single-seat mentality. The F-15E schoolhouse, which was, is the Strike Eagle with a Wizzo. Mm-hmm. And now we have the EX version coming online, which is going to be this hybrid of sometimes single pilot, sometimes with a Wizzo complement. And now they're going through this merging process of a combined syllabi, or however we want to phrase it, where you're going to have C model, E model, and EX model all coming together as they sort through that. Again, my experience in F-16, it makes it super easy when you're just the mayor of Cockpit City and not having to, it would sometimes it'd be nice to have someone back there helping out. Other times, well, it's on me.
And of course, I never flew in combat, but at the time you had some Vietnam experience, people in the senior levels, and man, that extra set of eyeballs, was always appreciated in a conflict in the in an air combat arena. So and those guys, there's some guys that are really good and they learn to kind of fly the airplane, and you can imagine your first BFM ride, with a new student up front, trying to talk eyes on to the the bandit or whatever, and all the other things that go through in maneuvering the airplane, and just riding along. If he gets high alpha, high AOA, slow airspeed, and the thing departs, it was. I think they knew where the ejection seat handle was at all times if needed. But yeah.
Did you ever depart in F-14?
I think so. Meaning, I think I did. No, that airplane.
I saw it in Topgun.
Yeah, nothing like that, thank goodness. So the engines were always a thing to be kind of concerned about. TF-30s, they weren't bulletproof. And, if you got slow and you stalled one and the other one's in full blower, you could see where you had asymmetric thrust and that could get away from you, whatever. I do remember cross-controlling the airplane and using a lot of rudder at times, but as long as you were cognizant of where the alpha was, it seemed to be okay. But you're always kind of a little tentative. It wasn't like with the digital flight control system in the F-16, like we know you're asking it for whatever you want and it'll give you what it can. The F-14, there wasn't any fly-by-wire in there for the most part. There was some augmentation that would help out for stability, but and then you'd learn to cheat the fly airplane when you went to the fleet, because in the RAG, it would be you don't do anything with the flaps. You get kind of a slow flight, whether it's a scissors or a loop or whatever. As soon as you got to the fleet squadron and some of the guys are really good, they let you clue in. You probably could crack a little bit of flap in there while you're out, and that's going to give you whatever needed to beat your opponent, the other F-14 you're fighting against in the squadron, type of thing. But if that was done wrong, a torque tube could break, and then maintenance has got to fix that, and that whole thing. So I enjoyed flying that airplane. So
yeah, I would imagine. And obviously you didn't fly any combat. Different time period. You were worried about the Soviets rolling through Europe, and I think you did have a couple of encounters, at least.
Yeah,
you or some shipmates with the Soviets.
Yeah, the one thing that I, probably before that occurs, I end up going through, like I said, finishing up the RAG, and again, the big experience of landing at night on a carrier was a whole thing in itself. And again, God bless the guy in the back to ride through that for the first time. So we get our night landings and all that other stuff, and then you end up going to a fleet squadron. And I kind of got out before I got involved in some sort of leadership in squadron specifically, but it was related to me. It was like a draft, NFL draft, where these fleet squadrons would get your reputation of the different RAG students. And if somebody got a kind of a high performer, one squadron the last go around, they kind of were at the bottom, and then it ends up, trying to disperse the talent pool the best it can across the Pacific squadrons at the time at Miramar. And I ended up going to the F2. The squadron skipper was the XO at Topgun when I was there as stash ensign. There were two 04s that were on the staff. So I was kind of a known quantity, and I ended up going to that squadron. So that was fantastic, because again, just those three quality individuals, and there were, everybody in that squadron was awesome. But it was good to be placed in a squadron, and DF2 did really well when I was there. They were one of the top, their top missile squadron. We did well there. So I went there, and within about a year, I ended up going to Top Gun as a student. Probably one of the most junior pilots to go through as a student. I think they needed a waiver at the time, if memory serves. So I was able to do that fairly early in my fleet tour, and go through. Things I remember about that reign as a student at the time, it was all air to air. Now when you go through, you've got air to mud. It's an aspect doing strikes and all that. The F-14 was a pure air to air fighter, much to its demise. As politics played out, you start seeing the F-18, the do-it-all airplane, and you ended up seeing funding going there, and then the F-14 being sunsetted back in the early 2000s. Even though they started to drop bombs and stuff at the later years, I think the die was cast. Things about going through as a student, one of the greatest experiences was constant peg. If you're familiar with that, being able to fight against a MiG-21 or a MiG-23 for real. Here's kind of another small world story. So we go out, and of course, at the time you brief over the phone, because I think we were in China Lake out of there, and then fly up to Nellis, the range real quick and back. And so you're on the phone, and I find out I'm talking to Z-Man, is the call sign, and it's going to be a big...
Real quick, Z-Man's been on the podcast. So
it's him.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So, so I go up, and it's the big 23, and you do all the stuff that you did at the time, and then you landed in debrief. So, fast forward to, it's probably 10 years ago or whatever. I'm at a small air show in Minnesota. I've got my youngest daughter along, and there's a tent with guys sell books, patches, and all that other stuff. And in there is, I guess it'd be Captain Peck, who started the 4477th, and he's got his book. He's on his book tour. And he's got a guy with him there, and it's a call sign Z-Man. And so, lo and behold, we did compare what were you doing. I was there in '86. What were you flying? It was that kind of thing. And I don't think I would have forgotten the guy's call sign, just given the flight, the circumstances, or whatever. Plus, it's a pretty memorable call sign in Z-Man. So, and the best deal about that, of course, is my daughter's with me, and she's like, I've become validated in her eyes a little bit more than just driving the Odyssey minivan around town taking her to soccer practice. So that, again, the small world thing was just amazing. So
that's super small world. He actually, I need to send him a text because he's getting close to having his book out, which I think is in spring of next year.
Okay.
But the Constant Peg, just a wild concept, the wild that it came together, and I can't imagine how cool it would have been to show up at the merge.
Yeah. Well, what they did in the initial was, okay, you had to do a size comparison. So that's the first thing. He would fly straight and level. You could take a look at him and fly around and get a feel for it. And then they did some performance stuff like 3, 2, 1, go. Everybody goes to full burner, and you can see the acceleration rate, and so that was kind of it. And then they did a defensive BFM setup, and then they would do an offensive one, and I think maybe we did one neutral. There wasn't a lot of gas. Those airplanes did not carry a lot of gas, and we were always flying overhead Tonopah. You could see it, basically, in case they had a problem. They could bail out and go hit whatever they got, 14,000 feet of runway there, or whatever it is. But again, to see an airplane with Soviet markings and all that stuff is just like, holy crap. And, they actually had a contingent of Navy and Marine Corps pilots there at any given time, maybe 3 on the staff. And I was one of the guys I flew with in VF2 was out there as one of the staff members at the 4477th. So, what a cool experience that was.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. So
I'm sure nothing like that has happened today. So but,
at least that we know about. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. That's a small world.
Yeah.
So I guess anything, and I guess jumping back really there's some thunder outside there. I don't know if that made it through the mic or not. Surprise.
Yeah.
Did your time at Top Gun? What was that like? And then I guess what year was this? Because obviously there might have been a movie that came out in and around this time period too, right? That made it pretty popular.
Yeah. So I went through as a student probably, I want to say in '86, and then ended up basically the rest of my VF2 career, after that with a couple surges over in the Pacific. And just all that kind of stuff that goes on in a typical F-14 squadron that deploys. And the ship we were on was the Ranger, and our sister squadron was VF-1, the Wolfpack. So that kind of all occurs, and then you end up rolling for orders. And then I was asked back to become an instructor at Top Gun, and that was pretty much in 1988 through 1990.
Okay, and you got out of the Navy in '90, right?
I did.
Okay, but let's jump into some of the Pacific, because obviously you got exposure with the Constant Peg, and then obviously on the cruise, you guys had a couple brushes with a few Soviet fighters, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. So it's like '86, and we're on what was called a surge. So the Ranger. We did a couple things. We did one long Indian Ocean cruise, so I checked the block for over 100 days at sea, got my obligatory couple beers that, on beer call, which was a thing back then. But before that, we did Team Spirit, which was a Korean exercise, go over and show force that regard. And then we did some surge, trying to get across the Pacific without radiating. That was one of the things that I remember vividly was they tried to sneak a carrier group without the Soviets at the time being able to track you through satellites that used ELINT, right? So, and that's a whole nother story on one of the things that occurred. But yeah, we get over to the Sea of Japan, and I remember the day I'm sitting the Alert 5. So one of the things the carriers would do is we would enter the Bear box, it was called. So it was a Tu-95 Bear, you know, the big 4-engine prop, counter-rotating, dual-bladed type stuff. And they had a heck of a range. They would come out and try to find the carrier group. And so we would have to have our status of the fighter squadrons ready to launch off in fairly short notice to go escort them, you know, intercept them first far enough away from the carrier group, and then escort them, you know, into the carrier group, wherever they were going to go, and just watch what they were doing. So, but now actually the ship, we're inside the Sea of Japan, so we're on the western side of Japan, and you got Vladivostok and all that other stuff going on. You know, kind of a show of force at the time, and so I'm in the I'm in the Alert 5 status, so I'm actually just behind the shuttle on the catapult, sitting reading a book or whatever, and the Rio's in the back, and we're just kind of hanging out. And then all of a sudden, I think we're listening to one of the radio frequencies, and the chatter gets a little more excited, and then we start hearing that the Soviets are launching fighters out of Vladivostok and kind of heading east, right? So, well, this is kind of exciting, and I remember it's like, okay, I think this is going to happen. And my biggest concern, in fact, I touched base with Mongo, the Rio, the other day. The biggest concern at this time was we're going to see the skipper come running out in his flight gear, or some 04, right? Who's going to bounce us out of the seat so that they can go intercept the Soviet fighters that, you know, nobody has ever seen before. So we couldn't get started fast enough. I mean, I kept looking at, you know, the guy in the yellow shirt, the directors that were kind of in charge of the flight deck or whatever, and I'm like giving him, let's go, and he's like, you know, just a second. He's talking like to the, you know, the handler who's the guy, you know, are we going to launch him or not? And they finally do, and I was so happy when he gives the wipe down, you know, they remove the chains, we're starting the aircraft, the canopy's coming down, because once that's coming down, it ain't coming back up, right? and so we go through our whole process, we get started, and in quick order. And one thing about setting the Alert 5, you know, back then, the INS and there was no GPS, it was an INS in the F-14. You slewed it to the ship's giant INS through a cable, and you tried to create a platform that was stable enough for flight. And so you would go up and get the alignment early before you know, and you kept the alignment kind of the whole time you were in the CATS, because that took 10 minutes or whatever it was, right?
Yeah. So is it connected while you're sitting there on your Alert 5?
I think it was called a SINS cable. They actually had a cable that would come in and plug in, and you know, it was just a giant wired data link that would give the lat long or whatever metrics it's looking for into its computer, into the platform.
Yeah, people are not familiar. Probably whatever. This doesn't matter. But I mean, it does. Yeah. Even like F-16, you had a 4 minute for the IGI embedded GPS INS to align. Okay. And you could also do a pre-alignment and then do a stored heading, or, you know, a stored alignment, which would be like 30 seconds to get going. But if you don't have the alignment, and I think Bags' story him not having an alignment, that's one of his funny stories. But I mean, that's a big deal. You have to have an alignment, otherwise a lot of things aren't going to work the way you want to. So I mean, I didn't think about the aspect of like the ship is underway, right? So it's moving, but this is like, you're
constantly down feeding, you know, that your position in space to the airplane. So and you know, the purpose of the Alert 5 was to be off in 5 minutes, and so with engine start, everything getting going and whatever. So and that was the status we were in at the time. So we get the start signal, we get going, and they pull the cable, and we're all set. We taxi forward, you know, just a little bit to get into the shuttle, which is a thing that will grab the aircraft, the nose link or toe link rather, and pull you for the cat shot. So And now we're talking, I think we're talking on the deck to the controller. We're getting the vector for where we're going to go. And we get the signal gate, I think it was, which means you're in full burner. As fast as you can get out there, that's your heading to go to make the intercept. And so we launch out the front end, and I think it was a left turn. And away we go in zone 5, afterburner, scorching out to make the intercept. We get radar contact fairly quickly, and we end up converting on an SU-15 Flagon at the time. And I think there's a actual YouTube video of the intercept out there floating around. I think he sent you a link to that way back when. And so anyway, go out there and pull up behind an SU-15, which was just amazing at the time.
Did he have any awareness, or did their C2 have any awareness of you guys, or did he show any awareness?
That we don't know. I'm pretty sure they were close, and at the time running the intercept. I think he starts turning back to the west. And so now the biggest thing is creating an international incident where you get so focused on running this intercept, you end up going through a buffer into, Soviet airspace, and you end up getting shot at or whatever. So that's kind of, if you listen to the comms on it, that's my biggest concern, is not to become that guy, right? And so anyway, we make the intercept, and there's no aggressive maneuvering, that kind of thing. It was cool to see this airplane with the silver and a green nose, drab green. And then there's also MiG-23s up, right? And so guys are running intercepts on those guys. And the MiG-23, they came out with their wings out. They never put them back. They were loaded probably with Apex missiles, AA-7s at the time. But again, not really aggressive maneuvering. And then, of course, as this thing occurred, we go back to the ship. We start talking about it. Rumor has it that these were senior level pilots flying out to try to get a chance to take a look at an F-14, to see what the reactions would be. It was more of a look-see, possibly from those guys, than some sort of, preconceived tactic that they were trying to develop and see whether or not the carrier group would react accordingly. At least that was a rumor, for whatever it was worth at the time. So,
a couple guys about it. It's like if you sat inside a MiG-23 or a MiG-21 or SU-15, the ergonomics not great, and so you have to wonder, sometimes just like what their awareness was. And I mean, obviously they probably have some, but it would be a significant challenge, I think, for most pilots. You get plopped down in that thing, like the visibility is terrible.
Right.
Instrumentation is not easy to read. Taking control from someone, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But like really, what is your awareness going on through? You got to honor it, but
right. And everything was single ship. They didn't come out in flights of 2, or a 4 ship. So that tells you a little bit also. Anyway, that was kind of a big, exciting day. And again, one of those things like you would have never thought it would have happened, waking up that morning, and then circumstances being what they were, a chance to fly next to one of those guys type of thing. So anyway,
that's a really cool experience.
Yeah.
The way it panned out.
Right. So a couple things also on cruises, as I mentioned, we were trying to get across the water, the Pacific, with very limited electronic emissions. So during the daytime, that's kind of an easy game to play flying, because flight ops are going to continue. You knew where you were when you took off. You knew the PIM, the ship's planned intended movement. You knew on your cycle in an hour where the ship should be, and you could kind of find your way around using your onboard radar, paint the ship, and end up doing that. But you had to stay night current. And that in itself is now a whole big deal, because usually when you land aboard the boat at night, you've got a holding pattern with guys stacked up behind the ship, and everyone lets down one at a time under radar control, and you're talking, the controller's talking to you, he's giving you directions, and starting down on the glide slope, and you have instrumentation aboard the aircraft. It's kind of like an ILS, right? Now, they wanted to kind of get rid of that as they're coming across. So it's like, okay, so since we can't put these guys in it was called the Marshall stack, since we can't do that, how are we going to keep them night qualled? So the idea was they'd shoot you off the front end, you would time a certain amount going upwind, you would go crosswind, and you go downwind all on time, right, and turn your base and into final. And then the ship did have the ILS, for lack of a better term. It was needles at the time was the actual deal. They had it turned down. They could vary the amount of the output, so they had a limited ability to kind of keep it hidden as much as possible, but still give you some sort of ILS guidance at night to kind of get behind the boat in a position at 3/4 mile where you start doing it visually and talking to the LSO. So it's my turn to go do this thing. And I'm doing the pre-flight and walking out, and I notice there's like this cloud, there's a fog bank off the port side, right, on the left side of the ship. And, there's stars above us, but, there's clouds over to the left. And I know which way the relative wind's coming from, because the ship's got to turn into the wind to do the light. And it's going to be a left turn, and it's going to go. And I'm talking to the RIA, and I go, you don't think they'd be dumb enough to turn into this fog bank or weather and launch us, do you? He goes, well, I don't know. But so we get in, and I remember on the cat stroke, because now we turned into the wind, and it's crappy weather. And I remember on the cat stroke, I actually said, because you're up hot mic, I said, this is the dumbest fucking thing I think I've ever done in my life as we're going off. So we end up going off, and now the problem is it's not really a fog bank, it's a low overcast. And I think, and again, these may not be the exact numbers, but they maybe wanted us at 800 feet as we're flying this pattern around the ship, right? And they want you to keep the ship in sight. So now I got a decision to make with the reel. Are we going to go up through this, because the scud layer is at 400 feet, let's say. Are we going to stay at this lower altitude, or are we going to poke through, try to do it all on time, and hopefully end up behind the ship and come down on the ILS, and do it that way? And so we both agreed, let's keep the ship in sight. We'll be very careful, set the rad alt, the rad altimeter. So, we're worried about that 400 feet, and that's where, again, having two guys really helps out. And so we take our timing and seeing the boat off, floating around out there with its lights in this inky, milky black night. So take timing, come around and roll in on the final approach bearing. And I'm a little bit right of course, and of course I'm low, because 800 feet's where I should have intercepted, but I'm going to have to drive in at 400 feet to intercept the glide path and come down. And I'm just working my tail off. I'm just concentrating, work probably as hard as I ever did on a night landing. And all of a sudden, I'm like going, what the hell is the moon doing out, and why is it green of all things as I'm flying like this, out of the peripheral vision? And all of a sudden the reel goes, brake right. And as I immediately brake right, I take a look, it's another F-14, and the green light was his position light on his right wing. So what that dude had done, and he was from VF1, what he had done is he had gone up through, took his timing above and let down. And thank God he was a little left correcting right, and I was a little right correcting to the left side, driving up to the glide slope, and he had started down on it. And then, in retrospect, relative motion the way it was, we're all kind of constant speed. It wouldn't have been a big impact, but it certainly got our attention. And now, here we are as a tube ship. Who's it? Which one's going to land? The LSO's like, okay, which one of you two am I taking? I think that was actually the call. And I said, okay, I'll go around, and I peel off to the right, and he ends up landing, and then we come around and trap. And that was just one of those things. The old adage, the boat is going to try to kill you. That was kind of the gospel guys would tell you when flying around the ship. They're going to try to kill you, right? So always be, head on a swivel, be very careful what you do, and know where you're at all times. And that was just one of those things you go, you got to be kidding me. They would try to do that. And, as it was, no harm, no foul. And he came aboard, and of course the debrief was pretty interesting, as you can imagine, with the LSO, what the hell happened and all that other stuff. But anyway, so that was one of those things you go, yeah, I don't want to do that again. But
it's something not as like for a phrase as simple as landing, and that is obviously an understatement when it comes to landing on the boat, right? But that's an admin piece. It's not going and doing ACM where you got planes turning and tumbling in the sky. Putting your pants on to go to work. That's what you're essentially doing there, and how quickly it can go sideways. And I mean, obviously, throughout your aviation career, and we hear all right, like the takeoff and landing phase. That's usually where things go sideways. And if you're going to land on a moving runway, that's a whole nother aspect.
Yeah, and you get it's all what you're accustomed to, and daytime, there was no greater sport than landing aboard the boat. Because what they would do is, instead of this extended Marshall pattern and one at a time for some sort of ILS, you would circle overhead the boat if it's VMC, right? And you'd have the tankers way up above if you needed gas or whatever, but then everybody's just stacked up. And the fighters were always we had F-14s and A-6s. We never had any Hornets on the Ranger. So the fighters were at the lowest altitude, whether it's 3,000 or 2,000 feet, I can't remember. But, you usually got a two-ship. Your sister squadron's got the two-ship, and they're in the circle. And so the whole thing was to be the first guys aboard. You wanted to beat your sister squadron to the break, to the overhead, and because that's what you want to do, right? Be the best. And so you get these guys, and then what you would also do prior to takeoff is you'd look at the launch pattern for the next cycle. So you knew how many planes, and you would do a count. You would call it hawking the deck and watch what was going on to set yourself up to be in the overhead just as they're wrapping up everything. And so you're the first ones down. So the big trick was, how do you get in front of your opponents across the circle doing this orbit, right? The VF1 if you're in VF2. So one of the things I used to do was, when I was the lead, I'd start inching back the throttle, right? And so whether you're start at 270 or 250, I get back to like 230. And now these guys end up behind you just because they don't see it soon enough. And now they're behind. So they're not going to cut across the circle in front of you, because that would be dangerous. They're kind of stuck where they are. So, and then the other thing, Rain, what you would do is, as you got more comfortable, there was an old adage, if your airspeed was greater than your altitude in the overhead, that's what you're looking for, right? Because the LSOs are out there, and man, if you could even be in a little afterburner at the time, that's even better. So if you could come down, I think, I probably would see 450, maybe 500 knots if I felt really good on that day. But you couldn't bleed the airspeed off if you flew parallel up the starboard side of the ship, and then did the overhead brake. You needed some turn to bleed energy. So what you would do is you'd come across the ass end, the stern of the ship, at your speed, but you'd start to pull right there. And then you could bleed off from 500 knots down to your approach speed. You drop your gear flaps and all that other stuff, and still be able to make the trap. But God forbid you screwed it up, right, and couldn't bleed the energy off, and you end up boltering, and which means missing the wires or get a wave off because you're not even in there. Now you've just caused a whole bunch of problems because the ship's got to wait again for you, and the whole time about naval aviation is trying to limit the time the ship's in the wind because they're vulnerable. Submarines, all that, you become a kind of it's not static, but a known speed and direction. And you don't want to have that for a long period of time. But when it works, it's fabulous. But when it doesn't work, it's always kind of some hell to pay down in the ready room or whatever. But
hearing the guys talk about the LSO aspect of it,
yes,
it is a science from hitting the perch point the timing, depending on the sea state, what the ship's doing, watching. That's why I am impressed by it. And I know once you do it a million times as an LSO, stand on the back and you can see the slight pitch changes or maybe the exhaust cans or black smoke, whatever it might be. You got a pretty good feeling of when this guy rolls out on final, like if it's going to work or not, probably right away versus. I mean, that's such a nuanced. I mean, that's precision that goes into that science. But if you pork it away, obviously the other things you mentioned, I don't know if it, like that F-35 a couple of years ago, man. I think that one might have been porked away. Maybe there's some flight control issues, but
I'm not
trying to put off a lot of knots really fast.
It's back then, like I said, there wasn't any digital flight controls, and it wasn't as easy as it was now. Now to the point of, in the newer airplanes, they have this thing called Magic Carpet. So they have designed software within the airplanes, and I never had a chance to fly it. It's my understanding. You have digital auto throttles with digital, fuel control systems. Everything's, perfect. And you take the stick. Let's say you're a little low. You pull the stick back to get the ball centered, and then you go to neutral. It takes all that into account, adds the power that needs, adds different flight control inputs to keep your same angle of attack. And to the point now where I believe you don't even go to the boat in the training command in T-45s. May want to check this before you put it out on video, but
it's now etched in stone. This is the fact. So
well, good. I might as well go out and say this is what it should be. But I know that you may not go to the boat until you go to your first squadron, be it F-35s or Hornets, in the case of being a naval fighter aviation. So so the other job that I had too is being an LSO and sitting on the platform. And one of the things that's a little different, I don't know if anybody's talked about this before, but when the sea state gets to be such that it overpowers the gyros on that lens, right? The lens, Fresnel lens, is gyro stabilized in a normal. I mean, a huge carrier is not going to pitch that much, but there are some sea states that are pretty aggressive and it will start pitching. They'll have to replace that with a thing called Mobilis, which basically is an LSO-controlled glide slope indication on this instrument. So green datum lines that look exactly the same to the pilot out there, but then in the middle, the ball will go up and down given the input of what the LSO is doing on the platform. So, and it was kind of a cool setup. It would, the post stuck into the deck of the carrier, and there was a handle on it in which a couple buttons, you could give a wave off. Like I don't know if you've seen LSOs, they're holding something over their head. I think I sent you a picture you can put in. On that, there's a button on the top that can be used for a little power. It's called a cut light. It can be used for request a little power without having to say anything. A little lights come on. I think they were green above the thing. Or the wave-off light, which was the big trigger finger, and then the ball goes away and red lights flash, and then the pilot is commanded to do a go-around without having to say it. So anyway, that same thing got put in a handle, and it was on this vertical, assembly that had it was on a slider, and you could feel where they put a notch in it, and if that thing was in the notch, the ball behind you was showing on glide slope. So you never had to look over your shoulder. You knew that if it's in the notch and he's on glide slope and you want to show him on path, you put it in the notch. The guy on the approach is going a little high. You would pull it out of the notch, start lifting it up a little bit, and the ball would show him high. And then, of course, you should see a correction, and you would lead him down to show him an on-glide path as he approached it. So the back of the ship could be doing this, but as long as you had a horizon line, and after a while, you know what 3.5 degrees looks like. One thing about naval aviation, we had a 3.5 degree glide slope, which effectively was 3 degrees because the boat's moving 25 knots away from the airplane, right? Just the way the dynamics work out. So anyway, you would do that, and we practiced it on good days, and then on bad days too. You'd bring it out and have to do it. And there was a whole art form with it. You know, you'd watch the guy. He's got the ramp cleared. Then you start showing him a little high because that kind of gets him down. He'll start to make a correction to come down into the wires. And so, but that's the way heavy sea states were handled. You know, trying to get birds aboard the boat. And there's some great YouTube videos out there of just some unbelievable stuff that's gone on. And I fortunately never had to deal with that, you know, that bad of a weather in that regard. But anyway.
Yet again, why I'm glad I went the Air Force route. Anytime I hear those stories, I'm like, that just sounds absolutely terrible. But it's amazing that guys and gals can navigate through that process, which not easy.
Right.
Well, Greg, I know we're getting a little long in the tooth. I hope you'll hang around for There I Was story. But as we kind of, you know, get towards the end here, like looking back, obviously a very successful aviation career, which is something that obviously not everyone is fortunate enough to make it that long in the aviation world. So congrats to you. But looking back, perspective-wise, is there anything, one, I haven't asked you that I should be asking, any, you know, parting shots, words of wisdom that you would have for a younger you or someone who might be pursuing this path?
You know, I've referred to this before, the old fake it till you make it type thing. I mean, it's funny, whether you start a company or whatever, you need to make that your sole focus. And, you know, it's interesting because I do, having a couple kids that went to the Air Force Academy, they have friends who've gone through pilot training and all that, and they've asked on an occasion, and, you know, you want to isolate yourself from as many outside distractions you possibly can. If it means a lot to you, you know, you're going to forego any sort of social things on occasion. Now, everybody needs that Friday night, you know, as you know, but you do that, you nurse your hangover if that's what it's got on Saturday, and then you get back at it on Sunday, you know, start studying again. I think it's just pure focus. And, you know, guys have talent. Some people will go through flight training with never touching an airplane before and end up flying the Raptor, F-22 or the F-35 or F-18, you know, whatever. And it's about focus. It's about mentality and what you bring in that regard. And you're going to stumble. You know, the hardest thing for me, I think, the analogy I have is, okay, so you're going to mess up in a high-pressure situation of flight training. You're going to have a sim that goes sideways on you, right? It's just going to happen, or a flight. It's what you do the next flight, the next sim. And I always had this thing in my back of my mind, I don't want to make it 2 in a row. Because everybody's got a bad day. 2 in a row now does it become part of your reputation as a student, as an instructor, or whatever, right? So you never want to string 2 of them together. So the analogy of the quarterback who just went out there and threw an interception, but then on the next series comes out, has got to put that to the side and come out and play from the very beginning, not even think about what occurred the last series, and be able to execute and throw the touchdown pass or whatever the analogy is. So that would be, if there was one, that would be it. You know, there's a lot of luck involved as well. So the physical aspect, whether it's getting your flight, as we do class 1s with the FAA every 6 months, you know, you try to keep yourself in shape and do all those things, and you know, hopefully you're able to get through on a long-standing career. But anything you can do, you know, to help yourself out prior is most important. And the final thing, you know, I'll always tell somebody that an airplane should never go anywhere your brain hasn't been 30 seconds prior, if that makes sense. You know, and that internal voice, what are you doing? At the very beginning, when you start flying, what's my airspeed? What's my attitude? What's the VSI look like, right? What's my heading? And it's this continual thing. And of course, that voice becomes quieter with the more experience you have, but your scan pattern, all that other stuff remains the same. But again, with a HUD, who cares, right? It's all there anyway.
Just makes it easy. Yeah, we kind of glossed over the whole F-14A model, but I mean, gosh.
I know.
You know, landing on board a ship with no HUD, landing without a HUD period, like, you know, but you know, someone's have to do it again.
I'm trying to get checked out in a 182 in the local Civil Air Patrol unit here, and I'm like, what? No HUD. Plus, I used to flare at 50 feet. Anyway, we'll see how this.
You're going to have to drive this one down for just a few more potatoes before you want to flare on this one.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's it.
Greg, I appreciate you taking the time. We'll do it again. We hit a lot of things today, but there's still a few more things that we probably could dive in on, and I really enjoyed being able to connect and have you on here. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. It's always great to talk fighters any chance I can get. So thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
Whatever on target.